Welcome back. It's nice to see you, and thanks for indulging me with a week off on Election Day. I'm not sure what you guys were doing. I was up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, actually last week. Um, for I was a poll chaplain in Wisconsin, so it actually was a very nice experience, very calm and very pleasant. But there were fears that it might not be like that. So an interfaith organization organized clergy to be at every polling place in Wisconsin last Tuesday. So it was an honor to go up there and be a part of a nice interfaith community and do that. So, um, but I missed seeing you guys, and I'm glad to be back with you. And we're going to talk about The Great Dictator today, which I hope you've had a chance to watch it. If not, it's always good to have the discussion first and then go watch it. As I mentioned, there's on let's see, this was on Netflix. I think it's or was that Amazon? No, it was on Amazon, and a very good transfer. In fact, it's a version of the film that I haven't seen before. There's one small scene that for some reason had been cut out for decades. It's the scene of Charlie Chaplin dancing with the wife of Madame Napoleone. Right? For some reason, that particular scene was not in the re-release of the movie that came out in the 1970s, and has not been included until this recent transfer on the Criterion version of the film. I'm not sure it adds much to the movie, really, a little more physical comedy for the character, but I can't believe it's true, but so it was in deference to the widow of Mussolini. They took that scene out. So, but I find that hard to believe, but you never know. I mean, film lore is a little strange sometimes. So, anyway, let me tell you a little bit about it, and then we'll talk about it about the text of the film a little as well. So, the first week when we talked about showing anti-Semitism in movies, America, I made the case that 1947, that's the watershed moment when A Gentleman's Agreement comes out, and Crossfire, which we watched last time, came out a couple of months earlier than Gentleman's Agreement. And someone asked, well, what about in Europe? I mean, were they making movies, say, in France or someplace like that, where they talked about these things earlier? And so I said, to the best of my knowledge, no. I mean, these were not happening. But the movie we watched for today, The Great Dictator, the one we're going to look at for next week, To Be or Not to Be, though neither of them mentions the word anti-Semitism, they clearly both portray acts of anti-Semitism, right? And they are both independent American productions. So they were not made under the auspices of the studio system. Charlie Chaplin, you may know, is one of the original United Artists. Back in, I think, 1914, four of the biggest Hollywood personalities at the time, Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and the anti-Semitic racist director, D.W. Griffith, was the fourth. They got together and created their own company called United Artists. The idea being that they would take control of the movie making system from the producers of the big studios and make their own films. So Chaplin was one of those. D.W. Griffith left the group pretty early on. The project itself has some kind of strange provenance in a way. It's hard to track down a little bit, but so Charlie Chaplin was someone who had the money and the clout to make any movie that he wanted, essentially, and he chose to make this one. It was released in 1940, was the second most popular movie in the United States in 1940, which, keep in mind, of course, this is before the United States enters World War II, right? when this movie started in production, the war in Europe hadn't started. The invasion of Poland hadn't happened. By the time the movie came out, the war in Europe was going on, but America was officially not involved at this point, not until December of 1941. Um, so, uh, nevertheless, there were some who didn't like this film in its time because the United States position was officially one of neutrality at this point, right? And so they weren't necessarily welcoming to a movie satirizing uh, the leaders of Germany and Italy at this point. Now, of course, a year or two later, things would change, and you would have all kinds of satires about Hitler. You know, songs like Spike Jones' "Der Führer's Face" and stuff like that. So that all becomes much more of a commonplace a couple of years later, once America enters the war. But this movie, on some level, presages those things and is a call, I think, to humanity. Charlie Chaplin called himself a peacemonger, that was how he saw himself in life. He also, it's kind of interesting, Charlie Chaplin and Adolf Hitler were born 4 days apart in 1889. And Chaplin was kind of haunted by that, and certainly it played into the making of this film in a sense. I mean, he he kind of said, he recognized even then that, how the world might be different if Hitler's artistic ambitions had been recognized the way his were, right? And could be very different. He went so far in those days to say, the roles could have been reversed, right? So and so that kind of plays into the plot that he created for this movie, where the roles literally are reversed, right? He plays two characters. He plays the character who doesn't really have a name. He's just the Jewish barber, right? And he also plays his version of Hitler called Adenoid Hinkle, right? So there's a lot of silliness and wordplay in this movie. There's a lot of slapstick comedy that harkens back to kind of the silent movie days for Chaplin. This is really Chaplin's first talking film. If you think about that, the talkies really started with the Jazz Singer in 1927. I mean, there's some other movies that lay some claim to being a talking film even before that, but really 1927 is the start of that. By 1940, I mean, nobody's making silent movies, right? Even in the, by 1928, 29, who's making silent movies anymore? So, but Chaplin actually was late to making sound films. Essentially, he told people he wasn't sure he had something to say, which he meant both sort of literally and figuratively. The movie he made prior to this is considered to be one of his great classics from just a few years before that. So in the 1930s, he makes a movie called Modern Times, which has no dialogue at all. It has a synchronized music track, which is what Chaplin realized he could do with a sound film that he couldn't really do with the silent films, where you were dependent on the organ player or the piano player playing the score in whatever theater the movie was playing in, right? So for Modern Times, he created the score to choreograph along with the movie, and you see that actually in this movie as well. That there, even though it is a sound film, you may have noticed there are significant silent sequences in this movie. They are actually, I think, not many people think of the dialogue scenes in this movie as being the movie's classic moments, right? The classic, most iconic moment in this is the ballet that Hinkle does with a globe balloon, right? That's kind of both classic Chaplin but also a powerful satire, right, of this man who thinks he owns the world. So, but certainly a silent moment. Another example of sort of something that comes out of silent comedy is when Napoloni shows up and they get a haircut together, right? And they, the character of Hinkle has been told that he's always got to be taller than Napoloni, right? So they sit in the barber's chair and they keep jacking up the height of the barber's chair, so that trying to get advantage over each other. So certainly a silent moment. And my favorite actually is in the scene relatively early on when the barber comes back uh, to to his barber shop and gets into a fight with the stormtroopers who are trying to write the word Jew on his windows, right? And this is an extended silent scene, and if you remember, I mean, this is where the love interest Paulette Goddard, who was actually at this time she was Chaplin's estranged wife. They had been married, but had split up. But he cast her in this part. But in that scene where she's got a frying pan and she's banging people on the head out the window, first a stormtrooper, which caused him to stagger around in a kind of a silent dance, and then I think Chaplin gets hit in the head next, and so the two of them are doing this sort of silent dance together with just the music in the background. They're both seeing stars in a sense, all right? So kind of an extended sequence that is uh, reminiscent, certainly of Chaplin's silent comedies, that nearly ends in a tragic moment. I mean, he's about to be lynched from a lamppost when the soldier that he saved in World War One, recognizes him and saves his life. So in later years, Chaplin talked about what he knew and didn't know about what was going on um, in the Nazi regime at this time. Uh, he said if he had known the full extent of the evil of this regime, he could never have made this movie. That in retrospect, I mean, I think he did think that it was um, you know, not maybe not a laughing matter, I guess would be the best way to say it. But at the time, knowing what he knew at the time, and as I said before the actual start of the war in Europe, um, it his goal was to make a laughing stock out of Hitler and cause uh, well, I don't know that he had any illusions that he could cause his downfall, but that he could certainly expose him to ridicule and maybe wake up the world to seeing him in a different light than he was being portrayed at the time. Um, there is some, I don't know if any of you have ever, probably you haven't actually seen the documentary by Leni Riefenstahl, Triumph of the Will, which is a Nazi documentary, right? The young woman filmmaker in Germany makes this um, uh, documentary, which is all about the power and strength of the Third Reich. I mean, it's a military spectacle and these united armies marching and this incredible architecture, this heroic architecture that um, is the architecture of Nazi Germany, right? So Chaplin actually saw that movie. We actually know that he saw it. He saw it along with one of the great French filmmakers of that time, a guy named René Clair. René Clair also got his start in silent movies, and he and Chaplin became friends. The story goes that René Clair was terrified watching the movie Triumph of the Will, recognizing this incredible piece of propaganda and how powerful it was. And Chaplin found it hysterically funny. He said so part of what he's doing in this movie is uh, satirizing that film itself. You know, the pageantry of the Nazi apparatus, right? The scene near the end where you know, they have this fancy dais with he's not called the Führer in this movie. Did you notice he's called the Fooey? So the moment where the great Fooey is supposed to speak, right? And so this is perhaps the clearest moment where he's creating a parody of Triumph of the Will. So um, so as I say, he's the Fooey, the Fooey rather, and the Jack Oakey who plays Napoloni. His title is not Il Duce as Mussolini's was, but Digadicci, right? So you know there's all of these things, and of course, you know, Hinkle's um, Gehring and Goebbels are herring and garbage in this movie, right? So there's a lot of these rather um, silly word plays and names here. Uh, I believe Napoloni is the Digadicci of bacteria, right? And Adenoid Hinkle is the Fooey of Tomania. So, so you know, all of these things. The movie got 5 Oscar nominations. I don't think it won any of them. It was nominated for Best Picture. Uh, it it was nominated for Best Actor for Chaplin. Actually, Jack Oakey, who plays Napoloni, was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, um, Best Screenplay, which is another award for Chaplin, and the Best Score. I don't know if you caught the name in the credits about who scored this movie. His name is Meredith Willson. You may know him better as the guy who wrote the Music Man, right? So, but he scored this movie. Although he said Chaplin was also a musician. Chaplin wrote music for some of his films, and later on, Meredith Willson said all the best stuff in this movie was Chaplin's musically. There, in addition to music that was written for the movie, there are a couple of classical pieces that appear in it. I guess maybe not technically, not from the classical period of music, but there's a piece by Wagner. The Globe Dance is the prelude to Lohengrin by Wagner. So don't know for sure whether Chaplin knew about Wagner's anti-Semitism, or whether he just simply thought it was the right piece of music for this. I mean, he certainly probably was thinking about the fact that it was a German composer and wanted to use that. The other notable classic in the movie is Hungarian Dance by Brahms, which appears in the scene where Chaplin, as the barber, shaves a customer, and it is exquisitely timed and perfectly done with the music and the honing of the razor and the strokes of the shave. I mean, it's again a great moment of classic silent comedy in a sense. Doesn't necessarily further the satire, but it's a great moment. And that's sort of the interesting kind of mix in this movie is that some have called this cinema's first important satire, right? That without this kind of skewing of people in power, a lot of other movies that followed for generations, continuing to the present day, might never have been made. I mean, the idea of using a film to satirize power and leadership, not to mention that late night talk shows and everything else that satirizes what goes on in the public sphere, uh, might never have come to be, or might have taken a different form if not for Chaplin taking this on. But at the same time, there's a kind of a, a gentle silent comedy going on within this political satire as well. So it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. So um, so let's see, what else?
If you haven't seen it yet, when you buy it on Amazon, when you pause it, I must have paused it. They tell you the names of the actors who are up on the screen. And at the very beginning, they said that Charlie Chaplin knew that Hitler had seen it and they snuck it in through Hungary,
Yeah,
but he didn't know what he thought of it. And that haunted me as I watched it, thinking, what did Hitler think of this?
right.
And
Well,
Brenda, I'm looking up what other movies were nominated that year.
so I can't tell you all that were nominated. I think I mentioned it was the second most popular movie. The most popular movie was a movie called Boomtown, um, which I don't know how many people have seen Boomtown, but it's about oil workers. It reunites Clark Gable with Claudette Colbert, I think, from It Happened One Night. Right. So that was the most popular movie. The movie that won the screenplay award was a different movie that starts with The Great. It was called The Great McGinty, which was written and directed by Preston Sturges, a classic director of Hollywood comedy. Um, so a fantastic director. So I can't quibble with the winners. Um, the let's see who won the best picture Oscar. You're looking that up. It's not jumping out at me at the moment.
I think, well,
It would actually be,
it's,
if you're looking up Oscars, it would be the 1941 Oscars.
oh, okay, because the 1940 is Wizard of Oz.
Right, Wizard of Oz and
Okay.
Gone with the Wind. I mean, a lot of people say
Yes.
1939 is the best year of American movies, but
Yeah.
19. So the awards never happen until January or February of the next year. So if you look
I
at
knew that didn't look right. Give
so
me one more minute here.
so this question of whether Hitler actually saw the movie seems to be in some dispute. Um, there's no way to prove that one way or the other. One thing we can know for sure is that in a book in 1934, a Nazi regime publication, it called Chaplin a disgusting Jewish acrobat. So, dismissing him as nothing but a disgusting Jewish acrobat. So, which both suggests that maybe Hitler wouldn't have watched a movie like this when it came out, but also suggests, of course, Chaplin was not Jewish. I guess you could say he was an acrobat, so he was certainly acrobatic in his depiction of, in his characters. So, but it's interesting that early on, the Nazi regime didn't care much for Chaplin. They found him to be decadent. His private life was kind of decadent. I mean, we might not think about his morality leaves something to be desired when it comes to his relationships with women in particular. He had several wives, each one younger than the one before, I think. He did eventually settle down and I think had 7 children with Una O'Neill, the daughter of the great playwright Eugene O'Neill. So, and several of those children have gone on to be actors in their own right in later generations. Geraldine Chaplin, I think, is perhaps the best known among them.
Nancy has her hand up.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say it's Rebecca was the 1941 Best Picture.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just put that in the chat.
Yeah, okay, I saw that pop up.
And
So.
here's some, and here's the rest of them. I couldn't get it all in one.
Right. So, it's hard to quibble with Rebecca. I mean, good movie. I'm not saying that this necessarily was the best movie of 1940. But, for our purposes, studying movies that have depictions of Jewish characters, as I said, the real Jewish Hall of Fame, I would certainly put this in there, which is why I suggested that you watch it. Certainly, it's well directed. You get to hear Chaplin's voice, which is actually a very pleasant voice. Unlike some of the other folks who did not make it to sound films because they didn't sound good when they were speaking. So, but but he did make the transition. He makes a couple of more movies after this, of course, and appears in some other things as well. He died in 1977. So, it's not, in the scheme of things, not really that long ago. So, he lived from 1889 to 1977. What else should we say about this? So let's talk about the film a little bit. If you've ever seen the movie Modern Times, which is the film that he makes just before this one, it's really a story about industrialization and his character, the little tramp, kind of being caught up in the big machinery of industrial production. Right, that's one of the most famous scenes from that movie, is him actually going through the machine, right, of the assembly line. This movie begins in a similar sort of way. I mean, you see its depiction of World War One, which I believe the titles underneath say "The World War," right, 1918. Because of course it wasn't called the First World War at that point in time. But what you see are these giant guns and these small men, right? And that's very much like what Chaplin did in the movie Modern Times, right? Is how we human beings, and in a sense, human emotion, is dwarfed by the mechanics of the weapons that they've created. So that culminates with another silent sequence where he's sent out to be the sapper for this bomb that falls out of the end of the cannon unexploded. And there you get the sequence where whichever direction he turns, the bomb follows him, right? And so he ends up, as you know, in a kind of an asylum with literal shell shock after that experience, and doesn't come out until the rise of this new dictator, Adenoid Hinkle. So he has no idea. He's been away from home for more than a couple of weeks, and the whole world has changed around him. And so a lot of the movie is about that sense of dislocation, right? And in some ways, that is a theme of Chaplin's, certainly throughout his later career, is the sense of a person without a home. This is sort of interesting biographically too, because we've talked about how the House Un-American Activities Committee got involved in the two movies from 1947. Well, they didn't like this one either, and they didn't like Chaplin. And eventually they essentially revoked his green card, and he spent many years abroad. Finally allowed to come back. I think he got a special Oscar in the 1970s. This movie actually got its first re-release after its 1940 run in 1972, I think. So it didn't play anywhere for decades. And then a new print was sent out in the early 1970s, and it became a little bit of a sensation among I think among people of my age, actually, when it came out. As being a movie about human beings caring for each other, right? And the speech he makes at the end, I mean, some critics don't care for that speech. They find it to be long and self-indulgent after a long, after a film that jumps from one thing to the next. I mean, there's this long, slow sermon at the end. Maybe because I like sermons, I like it. I think it does certainly, it sort of interrupts the flow of the movie and says, here's my philosophy, let me lay it out for you, right? Human beings should care about one another and try to save each other, not try to kill them. So this idea that I mentioned earlier, that Chaplin considered himself to be a peacemonger, You know, I mean, it's funny, he made this movie, and yet because he was a peacemonger, when the war actually starts, he's suspected of being anti-American because he's not in favor of war, right? So it's a peculiar situation that the guy who makes the first satire calls out the anti-Jewish activity, calls out the hypocrisy and the violence of the regime, right? Becomes suspect in America for not being sufficiently warlike. So it's kind of a fascinating thing that comes out of this. So. So I'm certainly ready to open it up. Do you have some things that you noticed that you'd like to talk about? Did y'all get a chance?
Elaine, go ahead. You're on, you need to unmute.
Okay, got it now?
Yep.
Yeah. The sermon at the end reminded me a lot of what Biden is saying today. There were a lot of similarities, and I wondered if you had any comments on that.
Well, I think I see those parallels as well. I mean, I think that anybody who talks about people caring for each other in unity are going to hit some of these same themes, right? And that's that's what Chaplin hoped for, is that leaders in the world would stop making gigantic guns and start caring about little people. That's what modern times is about too. So and really, if you think about it, if you go all the way back in Chaplin's work to his character itself, often referred to as the little tramp, right? He's a tramp. I mean, he's not wealthy. He's not often not even employed, right? But he's just a little man in a big world. So that's one of the themes of Chaplin's work and his comedy throughout his career. So for him, the little man, the little person, that's really what's important. And so I think that definitely does have some something in common with some of the rhetoric we're hearing from Joe Biden today. So Chaplin would have voted for him, I think. Although I don't know that he was allowed to vote in America. Yeah, John?
Well, I was questioning, this is obviously before computers, but these huge crowds, those are all paid extras that were for
They may
his
be
speech?
paid or unpaid. I don't know. A lot of people were willing. I mean, I've been an unpaid extra in a movie,
I don't remember you in there.
Yeah, I'm not in this one, but a movie. I'm an unpaid extra in a gigantic crowd scene in a movie called Black Sunday, about the terrorists using the Goodyear blimp to bomb the Super Bowl.
Oh, I remember that movie.
Yeah, so there
Oh,
are
that
these
was
giant
you.
crowd
Okay.
scenes in the Orange Bowl. So yeah. So I'm in that giant crowd. So.
But even the parade and so forth, there were a lot of people,
Yeah.
either employed or not employed.
Right.
You wanted to speak?
Yeah, it's that's what they used to mean when they said a cast of thousands.
Also, my cousin came back from World War II heartbroken because Una had married Charlie Chaplin, and he was in love with Charlie Chaplin.
He was in love with Charlie Chaplin. So
my cousin.
Yeah. Okay.
JD.
All right. Well, Una seemed to be the one where it worked out for Chaplin. I mean, so I guess he found the right match.
And JD never found the true love, or maybe he did.
Yeah.
Alice is next.
Yeah. Here, I think, oh, I'm unmuted. Okay. A couple of comments and a kind of a question. I put in the chat I read in I was so curious about this movie because I didn't know that much about it. So I did some reading on Wikipedia about Charlie Chaplin in the movie. And it said that in Wikipedia, it said that both Churchill and Roosevelt really liked that ending speech. And I think Roosevelt asked Chaplin to like say it again or something at some event or something. I don't know, but I thought that was interesting. Going along with what you were saying, Rabbi, about having a lot of silent movie aspects, I noticed it at the end. I think I'm remembering this correctly, that end shot of the movie was just Paulette Goddard just like looking out, and it was a long shot. I don't think in talking movies nowadays you see a silent shot like that mostly. I thought that was very interesting. And then I just have one other question, because I know who Charlie Chaplin is and I know a little bit about him, but I don't think I'd ever watched any of his movies all the way through. I found it interesting in terms of the ideas that he was presenting. I found it fascinating, but to me, it didn't appeal to me in terms of watching a movie. I'm just thinking of other movies that you just mentioned that were made at the late 30s, early 40s, Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz, what else? Rebecca. Right. They to me seem more accessible to me as a 21st century person than this movie. This movie was hard for me to get into, though I enjoyed the different ideas that he was presenting. So
yeah, I would call this something of a flawed classic. That's it. You know, I mean, I think it has brilliant moments, right? I mean, for instance, I do think that Globe dance is brilliant, you know, but it's kind of up and down a little bit. So, there are these scenes, and you know, it's not that the dialogue is so great, you know, it's really not. I mean. You know, when you think about it, right? I mean, nobody would say, oh, you know, this is like Aaron Sorkin dialogue or something like that. Talking about that last shot, I mean, I mean, one of the things that, you know, filmmaking in general is less patient. Let me try and explain that. You don't see very many long shots in movies. When it happens nowadays, it becomes kind of the, you know, everybody notices and talks about it. Like if you remember a few years ago, there was a movie called Birdman, which appears to have been made in one long shot, right? If you haven't seen it and you liked it, go back and watch it again. You'll see that now there are some tricks to that. There are some ways to make that look like that, but more frequently now. And some of this starts with Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, it goes back maybe to the movie Psycho. Psycho is the shower scene. There's something like, I don't remember exactly, but it's something like 100 different edits in the shower scene murder, right? So no shot is on screen for more than a couple of seconds at a time. That's how action scenes are filmed today. If you go back, even, you know, you don't have to go back that far. I mean, watch something like the car chase in William Friedkin's movie, The French Connection, right? And then compare it to a car chase in any of the Fast and Furious movies. They're completely different in the way that they're edited. And now looking back at what was considered to be a very suspenseful, dramatic car chase in The French Connection, it seems very slow because we've gotten used to this fast cut editing that in some ways probably really comes out of rock music videos and directors who started out doing those and then moved into feature films. But so it's very rare these days for movies to have a long take. And so a long shot like that of Paulette Goddard watching the sunrise, you know, seemingly in real time is very unlikely. to happen today. And if it did happen today, it would be a totally conscious choice. Back then, I'm not sure that the chaplain thought, let's make this extra long, and I mean, it just was. He just did it. And that's, I think, sort of part of my feeling of sort of the flaws of this movie is that not some things feel extraordinarily well thought out and others not so much, But this movie was made in a hurry. Right? Once he decided to do it, he wanted to do it and get it out there. I mean, it started filming he started prepping the story in 1938, and then filmed it, in the space of a couple of weeks. Right? So the goal was to get this out in front of people's eyes, right? I mean, it was urgent for him. So, yeah, Nancy?
Well, I know it wasn't a silent movie, but a lot of it was gibberish. So, or was
yeah,
made up
right.
language.
Yes, a made up language, which occasionally has an intelligible word in it.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Again, so right. So he's using sound, but not in a sense.
right.
But of course he's parodying everything he'd seen in this movie Triumph of the Will of Hitler speaking, and just trying to satirize that, which I think he does pretty. Those are some of the moments where I think he succeeds very well in making that happen. Yeah. So, yeah, I see a few hands. Barb, you want to unmute?
So yesterday was Kristallnacht, and thank you very much. It was a lovely little prayer service that you had yesterday. So it brings me to wonder, you said this was made in 1938. Wasn't Kristallnacht in 38? And was
November of 38.
Right. So it seems so poignant that he chose this ghetto life and as a backdrop to this story, and Kristallnacht happened. So is it just coincidental, or did he do this after Kristallnacht, or?
I haven't seen anything to prove that one way or another. But I can only imagine that the stories of Kristallnacht would certainly have contributed to the urgency he felt in getting this out. I mean, it was clearly a stepping up of the regime against the Jews. There had, of course, for 5 years before that, there had been anti-Jewish laws that had been passed and things like that. So he didn't necessarily need Kristallnacht to make him do this, I think, but it may have contributed to the speed with which he felt he needed to get it out. I will say, as I said, he looking back on this said if he'd known the true nature of the atrocity of both of what was already going on, what was to come, he doesn't feel like he could have made this movie, that the movie isn't adequate to that experience. But it's short in historic time, but the distance between the passing of laws, right, and the creation of the final solution in 1942, they're not that far apart in terms of time, but they seem to be far apart in terms of I mean, they stepped up so fast in a certain sense that Chaplin couldn't have imagined, I think, how bad it was going to be.
But he mentioned it many times. He mentioned concentration camps,
right.
And the final solution and all those other things were mentioned in the movie.
Yeah, I have a book on my shelf published in Britain in 1934 that talks about the concentration camps that the Nazis have set up and the anti-Semitism of the regime. I mean, it's not that it was a surprise. I mean, it's that, it's that taking that step from oppression to death camps is what I don't think people could see, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, the fox.
Yes, I wanted to make two comments.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think that he mentioned, death camps, and that was much later, and or the term final solution. The final solution term came only November, December 41 or January 42. So, but my earlier comment was that I wanted to react to Elaine's question or comment. She spoke about relationship to today's situation and about fascism. And in 2018, Marianne Albrecht, former Secretary of State, wrote a book, Fascism, a Warning.
Mhm.
And anyone who can have access to it could see how similar. She writes a chapter on Trump and other chapters on Mussolini and Hitler and other dictators. And so it's very, very interesting. Fascism, a Warning.
Yeah. Yeah, by Madeleine Albright. I mean, that's
Yes.
so, it's interesting. Honestly, when I put this on our schedule, I was not really thinking of it as a political allegory for the moment that we're living in. That was, I mean, anytime I would do this class, if I'd done it 20 years ago, or maybe 20 years from now, I would probably have put this film on the list, right? So the film's on there really because of the film. The parallels, are things that we have to sort of decide about for ourselves. I mean, I am loath to go to comparisons to the Nazis for anything, but the parallel that I see is the sense that that people think that they can use white supremacists to their advantage in an election and then control them as time goes on, right? I mean, that's the mistake in a certain sense. That was not something that Hitler did. It was something that I think who was the chancellor before him? Was it, I can't remember if it was Bismarck or Hindenburg, somebody like that, who thought that they could bring the Nazis under his wing and use their votes to keep him in power. That's the problem, right? Is that going from an election process where candidates like John McCain actively disavow being endorsed by white supremacists to welcoming white supremacists to vote for you, encouraging them to support you, is a huge sea change in American politics, and that's where I see the parallel, right? Is not so much in electing a white supremacist, but in electing someone who thinks he can have those people in his administration and control them. Maybe the QAnon people may fit that category as well, right? That you can have those people in your administration, you'll be able to control it. Those things get out of control. That's what history is.
If in 2 or 3 weeks the president doesn't change his position, we would have to have a 2 million people demonstration in the streets in order to get the people's message.
Right. Yeah, I'm still of the belief that this is going to peter out, but you may be right. And if we need it, we need it. But I do think that there. I don't know. I didn't really want to get off the movie and onto this. Maybe we'll talk about it another time. But that's my take on it. Is that he is being humored at the moment, and allowed to pursue a bunch of cases that will never see the light of day in an actual courtroom. And then, after this runs its course for a little bit, people will move on.
Alice has another comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is gonna get us back to the movie.
Right.
So
the
whole time I was watching the movie, I couldn't help but think about Mel Brooks. I'm assuming that Chaplin was a big influence on Mel Brooks, but you're
Yes.
film person, I don't know, but I just couldn't help but thinking of Mel Brooks in so many of the scenes.
Have you watched next week's movie yet? Have you watched
No,
To Be
no.
or Not to Be? Okay,
no.
so even more so, To Be or Not to Be. But there's no question that Mel Brooks would have been very familiar with this movie, and that part of what he does in The Producers in 1967 is because of somebody like Chaplin. But I think you'll see it even more in the one we're looking at next week.
Okay.
Which, To Be or Not to Be, which
Thank you.
which we'll talk about next week. But maybe I'll set it up for you. So that one is let's see, that available on YouTube. So oddly enough, I mean, this movie is, I believe, in the public domain, which is why it doesn't seem to be available through more conventional setups. But the print on YouTube is fantastic. I'm not sure who did it. It's the clearest print I've ever seen of it. Excellent. So
Rabbi, I just put it in the link in the chat, the link in the chat. So click on it right now. That'll save it, and then you'll have it for next week.
Right.
Or
So,
email me if you miss it.
right. So it's free to watch on YouTube, and like I said, it's a terrific print of it. So this was made slightly after The Great Dictator, still before the final solution was named and implemented in Nazi Germany. So this one comes shortly after the invasion of Poland and the start of the war in Europe. It, I believe, starts to be developed before the US enters the war, but doesn't come out until after December of 1941. It's released in 1942. So America is actually at war when this movie, To Be or Not to Be, comes out. It's directed by a great master of movie comedy named Ernst Lubitsch. And we'll talk about Lubitsch a little more next week. You may even have heard of, it became sort of a popular thing, the Lubitsch touch. Very specific kind of urbane comedy, urbane social comedy, somewhat morally loose, right? People having affairs and things like that. I mean, it's not that got him in trouble with the Hollywood production code occasionally. So we'll talk about him more next week. When Ernst Lubitsch died, a couple of directors were talking about him at his funeral. This was, I believe, in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, that Lubitsch died. The two directors were Billy Wilder, who made great films like Stalag 17 and what's considered by the American Film Institute to be the greatest comedy of all time, Some Like It Hot. So that's Billy Wilder. The other director was a guy named William Wyler, who's won more Oscars for direction than anybody else in history. So the two of them were at Ernst Lubitsch's funeral, and Wyler apparently said to Wilder, no more Lubitsch. And Billy Wilder said, even worse, no more Lubitsch films. Right? So, I think it's similar territory to this movie, but very different. It stars Jack Benny and Carol Lombard in her last role. Actually, she dies in a plane crash, before the movie is even released, I think, actually. So she, at the time, of course, you probably know, was married to Clark Gable. Clark Gable continued to put flowers on her grave weekly for the rest of his life until 1961. She's fabulous in it. Jack Benny in a role like you haven't seen him in, although all of the Jack Benny timing and mannerism is there. but he's kind of playing the romantic hero, kind of. So, see, with a little bit of a Lubitsch skew on that. Okay, so that's enough introduction to that one. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. So Vanessa, any last announcements for today?
Well, oh, Susan, yes,
Sue,
you need to unmute.
Sue, unmute yourself. Nope, still
Let's
on
see.
mute. There we go.
There you
Okay,
go.
where can I find Triumph of the Will?
Good question. I'd try looking on YouTube. Take a look. I mean, if not the whole thing, then I would guess excerpts are on there.
Okay,
Okay. It's probably available on DVD somewhere, but
okay,
it definitely is a Nazi propaganda film, so it's used. It's released sparingly, let's say. So
okay.
I think there may be a documentary about the making of Triumph of the Will, which includes
Let's say.
yeah.
Rabbi, John's gonna jump in.
Yeah, I remember, remember the old music box theater on Lincoln Avenue in Chicago?
Sure. Yeah.
They did that movie, I think it was 1973. They showed it in its entirety.
Yeah.
On the big screen.
Right.
I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's at one at the same time. It's abhorrent because it's about the Nazis, and it's beautiful. A beautifully made documentary.
Yeah.
So it's a very strange experience to watch it. Both
They did what they set out to do, and that was to make Hitler look like an avenging angel.
Right. Yeah. On the other hand, it also makes Jesse Owens look pretty good, which is an interesting. It's led to a lot of questions over the years about where Leni Riefenstahl's true feelings lay. And I think the answer is that she was truly a filmmaker and not into politics.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that doesn't really excuse her. So,
looks like you can find it on YouTube. 18 minutes long.
it's much longer than that, and it's
Okay. Well, about 18 minutes of it is on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. So, there's probably different ways to see more of it if you want to, but I think the original movie's got to be close to 90 minutes long.
So I do have a couple of announcements. Sunday is Eugene Finnerman. Next Monday is Maktub. It'll be the discussion, so you need to watch the movie ahead of time. It's an Israeli film on Netflix. And Rabbi, do you want to give?
I guess I'm leading that discussion as well. So
yes, you are.
If you like this class, you'll probably like that.
Yes, but the movie has some gratuitous violence, but it's in a comedic way, if that makes sense.
Right. So it's that I think that was well said.
Thank you.
It's the most popular Israeli movie of the last 30 years in Israel. And the guys who star in it also wrote it. And they are a powerhouse writing production team in Israel. They've written and created and starred in 2 or 3 different TV series in Israel.
What is the name of that movie?
I put it in the chat, Susan.
Oh, you just put it? Okay.
Yeah.
M-A-K-T-U-B.
And look for it on
Arabic word.
Yeah, and look for it on Netflix.
Okay. And John filmed.
Well, it's in segments.
Like they said. Yeah, he just pulled up.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can watch it in segments and pieces.
The Triumph of the Will. Yeah.
I'm not really going to recommend that one to you, but if you want.
Yeah.
There's certainly nothing Jewish about it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't belong in real Jewish classics, but you may want to watch a few minutes and you'll see perhaps what Chaplin saw in it that made him want to parody it. So. Great. Well, thanks everybody. It's good to see you all.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's so good.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Be safe. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye. It's fabulous. Thank you, Rabbi.